All right, perfect. So my name is Mary Alice Olson. I'm the SVP of Client Services with Certemy, and I also lead licensing strategy. And every month I hold a regulatory fireside chat series so that I can bring you the best of the best in the regulatory realm. And today is no exception. I am so excited to have with us today Dr. Elizabeth A. Carter, who you will hear me refer to as Liz. We're going to have a great conversation today about data-driven regulation and all of the information that licensing boards have access to, how they can leverage that data, and also the unique and emerging value of professional licensing data. Liz has great experience and insights, and we're so glad to have her here with us today. And in fact, Liz has so much to offer that you heard it here first. This is just going to be part one of the Liz show. I've convinced her to come back and talk to us again next time about leveraging data to ensure the fair treatment of licensees in the disciplinary process. So stay tuned. We're working on scheduling to figure out when Liz can come back to do that, but that's going to be another incredible series for you guys to be part of. So without further ado, let me formally introduce you. Dr. Elizabeth A. Carter. She is the director of the Virginia Department of Health Professions Healthcare Workforce Data Center, and she is also the executive director of the Virginia Board of Health Professions. I think the higher you move up, the longer and more titles you have, Liz. That's a lot. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you all very much for having me. And again, I hope it's a good day for most folks and you're in a nice, safe, dry place. And hopefully we'll make this entertaining as much as we can with data because, forgive me, I am a data geek. My background is I'm a research psychologist. So I'm one of those people that are like, ooh, data, let's do something with this. So, but anyways,
fantastic.
More to come here. You have some questions for me, don't you?
Yes. I do. And actually, speaking of questions, one housekeeping item. Liz and I are going to talk for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll be taking your questions. So if you would like, please submit them via the QA feature in the Zoom chat. There's a Zoom chat and there's the QA feature. Use that to submit any questions throughout the presentation. At the end, we'll save some time to get your questions answered. And of course, if we're not able to answer your question during this time, I'll make sure that to get those questions to Liz. So, because I know she'd be happy to help you. All right, so first question. As we discussed the value of professional licensing data and best practices for collecting data, what trends have you seen in the regulatory space?
Okay. Well, I've been with the Department of Health Professions, which is an umbrella agency that licenses well over 400,000 folks now, and there's 13 licensing boards, over 60 warm-blooded professions. And so we had a database to begin with. It's just lovely, but not everybody's in that same position. So, but over the last 30 years, I'm only 31, but anyway, over the last 30 years, I've noticed one thing that is just a huge trend. At the beginning, I shouldn't say this, the general public didn't even know what licensing boards were, unless you're an applicant. And honestly, their functions tended to be very specific to a particular profession. And that's not just in Virginia, all over. You end up having sort of individual licensing boards. And so, the data that the boards are collecting largely were for administrative purposes. So, just getting the names and addresses and maybe exam scores, birth dates, those kinds of things. And so, but today it's a little bit different. And nobody, like I said, nobody knew, but now the legislators know we're here. Federal government kind of knows we're here. Others have begun to know that we are there. And as I said earlier, we're blessed at the Department of Health Professions in that we came together as an umbrella agency back in the late 1970s. And we were sort of coming up when they had computers like, so we went away from paper as much as we could to a computer system. And we had to standardize the data across all the different boards for all the different professions, as much as you could of what you were going to put in your computer system. So, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but I think, the biggest thing is that we have data. You have data. All the licensing boards have data, whether, and I'm not sure if everybody's got computer systems or whether it's in paper form or whatever it is, but you have some valuable data that nobody else has. You didn't know that. You don't have. Employment Commission doesn't have it. Education departments don't have it. You got it. And increasingly, because of the increased, we'll call it regulation of professions, the need in order to have a license or a certificate or registration, that's usually a state issued one, in order to practice your profession, it's gotten a lot of attention for the veterans when they were having problems with employment issues and things like that. So Congress started paying attention to that even then. So that's going on. Also, the other big trend is for most state and I imagine provincial licensing boards, they're maybe in larger agencies, but they're still seen now part as a broader source of data, source of information that can help with policy and planning by your government. And so, they're coming to you. They're going to be asking you things now that in some agencies, 36 states right now are collecting some kind of health workforce data, for example. And I bet you, they didn't think they would need to do that before. So that, that's the big trend that I'm seeing. And one last thing about the trend overall, big data normally has been in the realm of the federal government or universities or large corporations and things like that. But with the advent of our computing capacity, that's, we all run around with laptops and phones and things like that now, the expectation not only to have that data, but to be able to share that data in a way that helps with the policy and planning. And several states have created a new position. It's called a chief data officer. And I think, you'll have information on that also, Mary Alice. So that their role is to find, all the different sources of data for all the different agencies, whether it's, workforce related, transportation, whatever it is, and find ways to take that administrative data and help inform policy. So those are the big trends that I'm seeing. And I said, like before, states that didn't even think they had to do anything like this. Arizona, about 2 years ago, actually, their legislature said, guess what, licensing boards, you're going to collect workforce data. And that kind of came like, what? Really? We're busy enough doing licensing. We're busy enough doing discipline and all of that and policy. But increasingly, that's what we're starting to see. All right, I'll shut up.
No, it's incredibly helpful. And I think, the establishment of a position like that really highlights exactly what you're talking about in terms of they now all know, legislators and others know that boards have all this data now. And so someone like you can help everybody kind of prepare for those types of questions. So it's incredibly helpful to have you here today to walk us through these pieces.
Absolutely. Very happy to do that.
So, speaking of healthcare workforce data, with regard to the Virginia Health Workforce Data Center, how did a licensing agency kind of become responsible for that? Can you kind of give us the history and the process there?
Be happy to. And that's one of those examples of, hey, we know you're there and we want you to help us. That's the prime example. Back in 2007, our governor had a health reform commission comprised of all these leaders from public, private sector, academia, and so forth to try to help inform what should Virginia do. We know we're going to having an aging and a growing workforce population. How are we going to address their needs in the future? And we also, so it's like, all right, and they're all sitting around, all these brilliant people, and they go, well, where's the data on who's actually providing care in Virginia? And they look over at the Employment Commission and say, well, we know how many people are employed. And they look around the room and they go, well, we got to do something about it. We have to get this data in the first place. We can't do an empirically based approach to how we're going to resolve our policy and planning issues without data. So the governor just goes, hey, he can go, hey, but the Department of Health Professions, we know you all have had this computer system in place where you have a lot of data. People have to come to you all to renew their licenses. You've got a lot of data that dates back that far. So, like their birth dates and just all this information. So you have longitudinal data as well as, every time you go to renew. You all need to sort of incorporate some kind of survey into your license renewal system. It's online. It's not that hard to do. And you already have a Board of Health Professions staff that are researchers. So it's like, we know you. First of all, we had to figure out, what questions needed to be asked. Where are the holes in the data that's already out there? So we didn't want to duplicate efforts and so forth. We brought into over 100 different stakeholders, again, from public and private sector, academia, the professions themselves, the boards. All of them were intricately involved in figuring out what questions should we ask in these surveys. We actually brought in some national experts as well who'd worked on with National Council of State Boards of Nursing and some other folks. And we started small with one board at a time. But anyway, they helped us figure out where the holes were. We filled the holes, and the holes are the demographic information. A lot of it about in terms of your education debt, that plays. Your satisfaction with being a licensee or being a practitioner, and your plans for additional education, retirement. Where do you practice? Who do what kinds of patients do you see? Those were the key policy relevant questions that they wanted answered. Now that wasn't in the licensure database. Some of it was, but not a lot. And so that's how we got started. And so what we do every month now, pretty not every month, well, it depends on which board. For every profession, we are now surveying 26 professions. We're also helping the Board of Nursing with their nursing education surveys. Is as part of the license renewal, we have a survey. A lot of minimal data set questions are there for every profession, and there's some variation for specifics about each profession. They have some of their own issues that they'd like to have included, but we've come up with a consistent methodology. In 2013, we had a consistent methodology that we've written down. We actually have a methodology document that I'm happy to share with everybody. We even came up with our own glossary because health workforce research was it's still in its infancy in a lot of ways, but we helped to standardize it. So they gave us that start. And let's see. And then, as I mentioned, the process is it's part of the online renewal process. Before you go to hit the pay button, there it is. And we only ask about 45 questions, so we're not making people go crazy. And we've had a pretty good response rate since then. But the key for this, every profession has its own profession report. And from that set of data that comes out, you'll see it on our website, and we can share that later. I want to make sure people get a chance to look at it. We can take from that, from the responses that we get, we're able to slice and dice the data because there's the same kind of measures across professions. So we can compare within a profession over time. We can geographic regions that are policy relevant, like workforce investment areas or health planning districts. It's already carved out that way. So it's set up to answer those policy questions. We started with trying to how are we going to answer the questions that you need. We even have it down to what's called an FTE or full-time equivalency. Members of the General Assembly asked for that. They wanted it at the county level. But the key piece of all this is that the data are confidential. And you've got to have legislation first that allows you to collect that data if you're a licensing board. You can't just be Big Brother and grab up everything that you'd like to know. Sorry, I ran it. But that's our process. And we do present those results at the respective boards meeting. And the constituents get to know about it, and we post everything. Every single thing we do is very transparent. It is on our website. So, and then it's there for anyone to use. Educators use it. Really, there's a lot of uses for it for people that are writing grants. It's the census. So, it may not be sexy, but if you need the information, we got it.
No, you do, and the type of data that you're collecting, it definitely seems like it's just incredibly valuable. And I guess to that point, how does the HWDC take that information? And I guess you touched on this a little bit, but how does it benefit licensing boards and influence state and national policy planning? If you wouldn't mind expanding on that a little bit more, because that's incredibly interesting to think about how one connects the other.
Absolutely, be happy to. Again, think of us as being the census again, but if you get a chance to look at our charts and graphs, the boards themselves want to know, who's actually working in the state. You may license a whole bunch of people, and we do. For example, for our physicians, only about 52% of them actually practice in the state. Well, it'd be nice to know that, and so the boards want to know that.
It's a shocking statistic. Yeah,
it is, and it varies. Every profession is, and some of them are working in federal facilities and things like that, so that's not considered working in the state, for example. Gotcha. So the boards themselves, if they've got issues that they see emerging that relate to workforce or education, those kinds of things that are specific to that, we actually can modify those surveys to meet their needs as well. And we learn from them. So it's an ongoing iterative process. We want this to be empirically based data that is relevant to the profession and to those that are their stakeholders. So that happens at those board meetings. We also, and there's a whole bunch of ways we slice and dice data, which I mentioned earlier. that's on our website because of that standard methodology. We call them care force factors. So if you get a chance to play on those interactives, you can see how you can, there's little storylines that go with each one of them that break things down by those regions over time, by professions. You can, team delivery is a big issue. Well, you need to know in your area what might be the combination of people who could be providing service in your area. So again, there's millions of uses of that data. In terms of just the boards, as I mentioned, we're the census. We also, we assist our Department of Health, who has to, and I think every state has some entity, usually their Department of Health, that prepares what are called health professional shortage area designation requests and things of that nature. And they used to have to just kind of call up people in the area. They used to take our licensing mailing list and call them and things like that. And now they use our data. We're able to actually share with them through a memorandum of understanding. Here's this data. And HRSA, which is the Department of Health and Human Services,
resources, all the acronyms, right?
Administration, yeah. They're like, oh my gosh, look what Virginia's got. This is much, we know whether you're working, how many hours you're working. There's a lot of questions that you'll see in there. And so now they don't have to do the other anymore. And they started telling the other states, you know what, this helps us understand what your shortages might really be. It can't just be all those 100% of those physicians being there. They're not. You see, you only got 52%, and they may not be in those areas. So I'm sorry, I get off on that tangent a lot, but so I know Indiana has used our survey, our approach. Arizona, there's a whole bunch of states, and there's a health work. I'm getting internet connection. Can you still hear me? There we go.
I can still hear you. Your picture goes in and out a little bit, but I can still hear you.
But anyway, so it's essential for us to provide that information to the federal government. On a national level, because of us knowing this, they've also been able to share this with us about it, about our healthcare workforce data center, and to try to enhance that. They've also been working to support some research centers, and we all kind of talk to each other and we help each other with that. But internally to the state, there are a number of different task forces that occur that look into workforce issues or education and workforce, occupational licensing, anything that relates to that. We're at the table, or at least our data or our reports are at the table because we are the census. So it's kind of cool that we're able to help that way. And so we even helped the UK. They came and they've started to use our approach, and we want to share that with all the states. Anybody would like to look at the instruments that we have, you're welcome to it. I'm happy to share with you the methodologies. You don't have to recreate the wheel because we found out what those key questions are. At least they were for Virginia. It seems like it's that for other states as well. So that's my response to that.
That's incredible, and it's great how much influence you guys have had in other states and now other countries too, because it's obviously incredibly valuable work that you're doing that frankly was really needed so that you can make data-driven decisions when it comes to regulation and also policy. So.
Exactly, and that's a win-win because if we all begin to collect, we're collecting data that does not exist. There's no other, because we are licensing as a state or province level thing. The feds don't have this information. So there's no place to go to get it. And if you don't collect it, and that way we can't, people say, well, how are we compared to Kentucky? Well, I don't know, because Kentucky's not doing this yet. But, and there's some, but there's some other states around us that have begun to collect. And so it'd be wonderful if all of us were collecting at least some basic minimal data sets, the same, so that we could compare. So we can see how is it going on in your state or versus ours, and did you get, we ask where people have come from, but I don't know where they may leave for us right now. Those kind of another hole that's there. Yeah.
No, that actually brings me to another question. So boards that aren't collecting data right now, what is kind of a first thing that they could do to start collecting additional data from licensees? I mean, I know you mentioned earlier that you really need a piece of legislation, but is there anything that they can do without that just to start kind of gathering more information?
I mean, you always have to look to see what your statutory authority is. I mean, and some boards have, broader than, it just depends on, every state's got their own set of circumstances. But, if there are burning questions that your board needs to know, I mean, you can do surveys, and sometimes you can use SurveyMonkey and things like that for that as well. But the first thing is, what are the burning questions that you all are being faced with that you may not have the answers to? And sometimes you'd be surprised at what you do have the answers to and the data that you're already collecting. And we can talk about that at another one of these things, because I think our time is getting close here. But yeah.
No, that's a great point. Take a look at what you've already got.
Yeah. See what you got. And if you have online capabilities, you're way ahead, because you can do that without the cost or without the extra effort for it. The other thing you need to think about is who's going to analyze the data once you get it, or where does that data go once you get it? Do you have staff, or do you have the capability, or are you working with a university or a vendor that might be able to help you do some of the basic analyses? So those are the questions you need to keep in mind as you think about this. But again, I know it's coming, guys. Get ready. They're going to be coming at you for this. So whatever we can do to help you, I'd like to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you're right about time. It's definitely time to move over to some audience questions, but you laid the groundwork so well for us. Really appreciate it. So one question that's popped in that I know you and I have talked about, because I had the same question for you in previous conversations, is how do you kind of handle pushback from licensees that say, I don't answer all of these questions, you can't make me do it? Like, how do you get a good response rate?
We have gotten, I was astonished. We have gotten a wonderful response rate. I've gotten as high as 99% response rates from certain professions, as low as 69. Okay, so we average about 85%.
Still not bad. Yeah.
And because we are the wonky people that do the data, we do have estimation methods for the folks that don't answer. So it's not going to be the end of the world when they don't answer. However, I've had, in all these years, and it's been dating back to 2008, I've had 7 people call me just as mad as hornets, saying, I don't want to do this. How dare you, da, 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 da. And I go, don't. I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to give me garbage for me to have to clean up in the data. So you don't have to do. Some states I know have begun to collect data, and they've made it mandatory. In Virginia, we haven't had the need to actually do that. I think the information that they get from the survey reports and so forth, that the word has gotten out, and they're like, oh, I didn't know this. This is cool. And so you get more almost than you give. But if you don't give, you kind of feel a little guilty for not doing that. So I think that's part of it as well. And the boards certainly have been encouraging people to provide the information, because the more information you have, the more it can help you.
So. Absolutely. No, that makes sense. So we have one question. What are you doing to minimize irrelevant data requests to licensees and state boards for information not pertinent for professional licensure? And he provides an example. Lots of questions are asked, like, do you practice full-time or part-time? Or do you plan to retire within 5 years?
Yeah.
All of that is not relevant to licensure, but may only be useful for health policy and access to care. So I think he's talking about information requests for data that come from the outside.
Right. And again, the data that we have in those profession surveys, the reports and so forth, do speak to those issues, because those were those policy relevant issues that our original group asked for. So you may have something different in your own state. You don't have to do everything that we do. It's just that, it was actually specified in our law, gather this health workforce policy relevant issues. You have to do that. And so it may be different in your state. But there's, again, and the way we provide the information is once we do the reports, it's out there. So I don't have to spend a lot of time going, oh, hey, go look at this or that. It's there for you to see. I mean, we do answer questions, but it's not as burdensome as you would think it would be, because if you set it up, it's like a library that they can go look at, and it's pretty helpful. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've got another question, and thank you all for the participation. Keep those questions coming. This is a great question. How has collecting the data helped your board perform its regulatory functions?
It helps them by knowing, particularly for the nursing education programs, that's a big one for them. Just understanding the distribution of their where the needs are, where people are coming from to go to school or to go to the nursing for education programs, for example. That one, it gives them a sense of what that uptick is and where it's going. For the respective boards, understanding, for example, one of the things that pharmacy has done is their practice is growing, is emerging, is becoming, their scope of practice is sort of broadening. And they're interested in collaborative practice kinds of questions. So, you can learn from what you ask questions about in a way that helps them with their own policy when they go to ask for certain legislation or if they're working on their own regulations. And the other big piece of this too is we've had like scope of practice issues, and we'll talk. That's a different one too. We'll talk about later. But to know, where existing people are already practicing. If you're going to say, well, there's a need over here, well, is there or not? And depending upon the distribution. So, again, it's just the facts, ma'am, is all we have, so we stay out of fights. But we do have it's there for anybody to use and reference. And the boards have found it very helpful to them. They go and they can present on what they know about their own workforce. When they go to national meetings and so forth. So far, we haven't had any tomatoes thrown at us, when I go to present. So far, you may start now, I don't know, but we haven't had it to date. It really has been a win-win situation.
It definitely sounds like it. I think we have time for one more question, and you have touched on this a little bit, but what resources are you aware of to help licensing boards collect data? And you so graciously offered yourself, but just
yeah, but I'm little. The best place to go is there's a Health Workforce Technical Assistance Center, another one of those mouthfuls. And you've got the links to them. It is supported by HRSA at the University, the State University of New York up in Albany. And they provide technical expertise and to support research policy. I'm reading their own little list here, and planning by assisting states and organizations that engage in health workforce planning. They also track data collection, analysis, and reporting efforts and relay the latest research news from other research centers. They are relatively new. They've been out for about 4 years now. Thank heavens somebody's paying attention to this issue and helping to pull things together. And they also bring in information from those. There's several research centers throughout the country that Harris is now supporting. But anyway, they're the go-to because what they do is they go there and then they come to me on some of this stuff anyway. But they have my data collection instruments just on file so that that's available to you. If you didn't want to have to come through me, you can go straight to them, and we'll have that link for you if you need it. But so
perfect. Oh, no, that's perfect. And and Liz is right. When we send out a recording of this video to all attendees, I'll make sure to include a link to the Health Workforce Technical Assistance Center as well. I think I got that right. But I want to thank you again, Liz, for all of your time. And I'm sure all of you can understand why I've already asked Liz to come back. For those of you that weren't able to join at the top of the call, we are going to have Liz back on this regulatory fireside chat series to talk about how to leverage data for the fair treatment of licensees in the disciplinary process. So she's a wealth of information. And so glad to be able to call her my friend. And in the regulatory space, fantastic. Liz, thank you so much. And thank you to all the participants and interest in this chat. This was a very popular chat, Liz. So thank you again for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody have a great day and stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.